Indentation can be nested as well. This is how we create nested conditionals or nested loops. This basically means putting one control structure inside the code controlled by another control structure. So let's update our running example to use 3 numbers instead of just 2. Here we create 3 variables, mynum1, mynum2, and mynum3, and we give them the values 1, 2, and 3. That should make our code easier to read going forward. Line 5 is a conditional control structure that checks to see whether or not this condition is true and only runs the indented code if it is. Again, we'll talk more about that later. Here, mynum1 is 1, mynum2 is 2, and so it's true that mynum1 is less than mynum2. Because that conditional has a true statement, the lines of code underneath it do in fact run. So we run line 6 and line 7, and line 7 gives us our first print statement. mynum2 is greater than mynum1. Line 9 gives us another control statement. This control structure, if mynum1 is less than mynum3, only runs the indented code if the value of mynum1 is less than the value of mynum3. The value of mynum1 is 1, the value of mynum3 is 3, and so this is again true. And so this also prints. mynum3 is also greater than mynum1. Then, lines 12 and 13 are not indented under any control structure, and so they run regardless. As a result, this will always end with execution complete being printed. But let's see what happens if we change the values that are used in those conditional statements. Here, we've reversed the values of mynum1 and mynum2. mynum1 now has the value of 2, mynum2 now has the value of 1. Our first control structure was a conditional that said if mynum1 is less than mynum2, then run this indented code. mynum1 is now 2, mynum2 is now 1. So it's no longer true that mynum1 is less than mynum2. As a result, the code skips this entire indented block. It runs none of the code that was indented underneath that control structure because that condition was false. Notice though, it would have been true that mynum1 is less than mynum3. mynum1 is 2, mynum3 is 3, and so it still would have been true that mynum1 is less than mynum3. But notice that this print statement never runs. The only thing that runs is our final print statement. This print statement never runs because it's inside the code indented under that control structure. That control structure controlled whether or not all the code indented underneath it ran, including that conditional. So even though this conditional would have been true and would have allowed that code to run, this conditional itself never ran because it was controlled or indented under the previous one that didn't run. Now in order to explain this, we've jumped a decent bit ahead into how conditionals actually work. So you might find yourself confused right now, and don't worry if you do, we haven't really talked about how if statements like this actually work yet. The important thing we're demonstrating here is just that indentation is how Python interprets which lines of code are controlled by which other lines of code. So whenever you see a block of code indented under another line, you know that that line controls that block of indented code.